collapse of that system, you've had a reduction in productivity in the country because people are staying home and not being able to engage, which is fear. So the problem here is that the government brought in a policy without economy. Government promised us that they were going to hit ground running. They were on top of the situation, and they had to provide the solutions that were needed to move the country forward. So at this point in time, what the government has to do, looking was to find out short-term and medium-term palliatives that will help assuage the bottom line. In the interim, while it is in stopping the fuel subsidy removal, because we have that money now that is saved up that could be used for other important things. Nigerians want to see that action begin. But the problem here is that there are doubts, because if it's taking this government this number of days to appoint these ministers, of policies, we need a government that is agile. We want a government that is adapt. It can anticipate problems, or if there are problems that occur in poor policy implementation, it's able to go back to the drawing books, and bring about a change. With that speed is important at the point we find ourselves here. So I won't be able to propose what the government should do because they told us they know what to do. But it's important now that as the policy has been implemented, they need to understand that there are persons and businesses that are suffering. So the first thing is those individuals that are falling through the cracks. What can the government do? It's not about distributing rice. It's not about distributing 5 billion to states. We've tried this for over the years, and the results have always been the same. So how can we target these individuals? We have BVN, we have NIN, businesses have records. How can we ensure that many of these businesses can be targeted and supported? In the United Kingdom, in the United States during the COVID pandemic, you had many of these businesses supported by the state. The state literally printed money to support these businesses and support these individuals. Nigeria is at that critical stage where if nothing is done, we lose these things permanently. They become permanent impairment. They become permanent losses, and jobs are lost. And of course, that also affects the long-term viability of the economy. So the government, for me, the critical thing the government needs to do now is to ensure that we don't lose those businesses that are about to teeter off. So how do we come up with some support schemes or measures for those businesses? Because they employ people. A business that is unable to survive because of the high cost of fuel, because of the high cost of transport for staff. You are paying staff salaries that are even unable to bring them to work anymore, for the month. So those things are putting strain on small businesses. That's the critical point the government needs to come in. If we lose the small businesses, then it begins to affect the country in the long term.
All right, let's get to the part of what you call it now, transportation. By the way, the president will be swearing in ministers later today, and we hope that they're able to hit the ground running, like he had said earlier. But then first, in fact, before we turned accommodation and housing, how Nigerians have lamented over time. They need affordable housing, but it seems like government isn't paying attention to that aspect. We have a new Minister of Works who should be taking the oath of office today. What would be your thoughts in this regard? I'd like you to walk us through what your report says about housing and the rental market.
Yeah, basically, if you look at what we did for our report in terms of housing, we compared the prices at the beginning of the year with June. And one of the things we found out was for a one-bedroom apartment, the prices have gone up by about 9.5%. For two-bedroom apartments, the prices are at about 9.7%. For three-bedroom apartments, the prices are at about 8.7%. And while for four-bedroom duplexes, they now cost 2.9%. Now, this is important to know that this is on a national average. But then if we go sectorially, so if we compare it across the regions, we will discover that we have a different value. So I'll give you an instance. Northern regions in the country have it worse. So in the Northeast, the general price in accommodation is about a 20% increase, across band. So in the Northeast region, you have accommodation going as high as about 20%. If you look at the North Central, it's about 11.36% between January and June. In the Northeast, it's about 19.78%. In the Northwest, it's about 4.84%. Now, what is funny here is that in the Southeast region, we had a minus 1.86% in accommodation prices. So there was a drop of about 1.86%. We had a minus 2.94% drop in accommodation prices in the South. And in the Southwest, we had about 3.9% increase in accommodation. Now, there are many factors that definitely would have affected this, which is why we're currently doing our surveys to find out things that would have elicited some of that. But for the Southeast, it's easy to infer, for instance, the insecurity that was noticed around many of the southeastern states may have affected the prices of accommodation you had. You also saw a lot of movement. One of the things you should know about Nigeria is that we're beginning to see a lot of movement towards NEF centers, where you have people moving towards activity regions in the country. So you're seeing that upsurge in Lagos. Lagos is the major driver, for accommodation in the whole southern region. In the northern region, it's actually the FCT. So you're having that movement of people to those places because that's where they believe there are businesses, and these are mobile people, these are young people, looking for white and blue collar jobs in these areas. So generally, we expected the accommodation rises in those areas. Now, for the drop, like we saw in some of the other northern areas, we saw moderate rises in accommodation, which was in line with, a normal 2 to 4% inflation rise, and that you will expect, on a year-to-year basis.
Now, I like that you just talked about, this rural-urban migration, and also the brain drain that we're dealing with. What is the impact of this migration? People moving from the rural areas to the urban centers, and having to share resources available to a limited number of people. Now more people having to share those resources. What is the general impact on our economy, especially also looking at the fact that many people are migrating, leaving the country to other countries, especially our best brains that people have described?
Well, for the first issue in terms of migration from the rural area to the urban area, it's actually quite painful, because what that means is that, like you rightly said, we're beginning to have a lot of pressure put on resources. Now, when you have planning done for areas, there are estimates on how many people will be here, and those estimates are used to guide things like, the road construction network. They are used to guide things like the electricity, the transformers that will be supplied to those areas, because the estimate is that this will be the growth, the projected growth of this area and all that. But then when you have this upsurge of persons in those areas, they overload those facilities, and then you have those facilities breaking down quite early. So that's the first bit. The second bit with that is that you actually neglect the rural areas. Now, the reason why uniform distribution in terms of migration is important is because you have the population scattered across areas, distribution goes wrong. But when you have a concentration of, persons in a particular area, a lot of resources are needed, to keep many of the facilities in these NEF centers working and functioning. And so that leaves little resources, to develop the rural area. So you still see a lot of neglect, in terms of facilities available, from healthcare facilities available, even in terms of, the businesses or the opportunities that are available in those particular areas, transport opportunities and all that. And these things have an impact on our life. So the problem here we are having with the rural-urban migration, again, is also the role of economics. When you have more demand and the supply is limited, that pushes up the prices of accommodation in those areas. So more or less, it becomes more or less like an auction, where you have people, just putting out prices, So you see some prices of accommodation, and you look at the structure, the quality of the accommodation, but it doesn't actually merit the price tag on that particular accommodation. It's simply because you have more demand, than supply. For the second bit, which is with regards to the brain drain issue, migration is common among us as humans. We have it internally, and of course, we also have, the normal migration from one region to the other. I personally had my first degree at the University of Ibadan, but then I got scholarship. I went over to England for my master's. I got funding. I went to South Africa for my PhD. This was simply because these were countries that gave me opportunity to improve my own learning. And they created opportunities for me. Now, we've utilized those opportunities. We've come back to the country. We've set up a business. We are employing people and, of course, contributing locally to the economy. So I may not have been able to do this if I had stayed all along in the country, right? So one of the things that migration does is not necessarily brain drain per se, especially when you consider the fact that foreign direct, diaspora remittances make up a significant chunk of our foreign income. So one of the things those things they do for us in terms of migration is they help us assess other opportunities, they help us develop capacities elsewhere, and at the end of the day, they do have impact back home. So I think the only problem here is the disconnect between the diaspora community and the Nigerian community. So we've been able to build that connection to get their money because they have to finance and support, but we've not been able to build that network to tap into the enormous potentials, the knowledge that they do have. I think that's where the gap is.
Let's take the next few minutes to talk about an area that you have a big interest in. You've done a lot of work and research in the energy sector. The president, in his designation of ministries, has created the Ministry of Gas Resources, which has a Minister of State. Also, the petroleum industry has the petroleum and what do you call it now, oil has a Minister of State as well, which would mean that the president would be presiding over these two ministries. We've also seen the Ministry of Power. Many people have argued that Nigeria says it's transitioning to cleaner energy. How do you think we're going to achieve this, and how sustainable is this whole creation of new ministries, especially in the oil and gas sector?
One of the things I always in my research, because my research was at the beginning part was mostly focused on the Global South, and then latterly I've been doing research on the Global North. For the Global South, I think one of the best places we can always take lessons from is China. And what China simply, and of course South Africa at the early stage, and what they've shown us is, listen, if you have resources that are local to you, resources that you don't have to import, you don't have to pay price to get them into your country, utilize those resources to at least achieve a considerable level of development. That development generates the wealth income that is needed, and then that can give you a latitude or opportunity to then experiment on other things. If you look at the UK, you look at Germany or Europe generally in total, these countries still run on fossil fuels. You have nuclear in France, you have Germany with their so-called Energiewende program, and still, you still have corresponding increase in import of electricity. You see their dependence in Russia on Russian gas, and of course how that has impacted the economy and all that. But look at China. China has been able to utilize coal, and what it has done with coal is it has taken a huge chunk of its population away from poverty. Now, China now has the financial prowess to begin to experiment on renewables, build wind turbines and solar panels, and try all these particular new technologies. That's fine. And that's what also is happening in other Western countries. Many of these experiments are being done on the backbone of fossil fuels. And so for Nigeria, the first thing we need to get right is we have natural gas, we have gas. And of course, gas is going to be one of the primary energies for the future, right? So what we have to do with gas is utilize gas in powering our economy. It's as simple as that. That's the only thing the government should be interested in. How do we use gas to power our economy? We need to see new large gas power plants being built. We need to see decentralized, gas power plants being built to power estates, to power industries, to power business communities. And that's what we want to see in the country. Not about renewables or whatever. No, they are efficient gas turbines powering our economy. That should be the target of the government. When we achieve that, that gives us the opportunity to attract development. You have businesses springing up, you have positive knock-on effects of that. Now, we can then begin to look outward to see how we can now incorporate things like renewables or whatever. But we don't even have a leg standing. We don't even have electricity. Our transmission grid is messed up, right? Metering is still not complete across the country, right? So the implication of all these things is we are not even standing, And yet we are looking outward, to the West and comparing ourselves with other countries. I don't think it bodes well for us. So the primary business of the combined ministries should be to look at how gas can be used to power our economy. We need a lot of gas powering our economy. So we should secure gas reserves for ourselves and ensure that for the next 50 years, Nigeria is able to power ourselves sufficiently. We need you need 24 hours electricity in Nigeria if you want to see significant growth and improvement. And we can get this cheaply, with our natural gas. So I think that should be our primary interest. With regards to the whole net zero and climate change issue, you see, when countries come up with their nationally determined contribution in terms of how we want to reduce our emissions on a year-to-year basis, there's what is called the peak, plateau, and decline arrangement. Now, what that acknowledges is that we have the opportunity for our own emissions to peak. First of all, we need to acknowledge that we are minority contributors to climate change. We do bear the brunt when there are issues, for instance, flooding that we see, the desertification in the northern part of the country and all that. Of course, we do bear the brunt, but that's climate change. Those are national, global averages. However, we do have the opportunity to see our emissions peak. So let's take advantage of that opportunity for emissions peak, power our economy, ensure we're able to support small businesses, people with creative minds. Tailor shops should not be powered with generators. You should not have people expending money on diesel or whatever. Those are things that are frittering away our scarce foreign reserves. Let's power the economy. Let's grow the economy cheaply with cheap electricity, which is the natural gas that we have. And that gives us an opportunity to then, grow our GDP, because power is one of the things hindering that significant growth in our GDP. And then in the near future, we can now begin to look at clean technologies. Perhaps by that time, there may have been improvements in the efficiency of solar panels. We would have had, wind turbines and all those things, at moderate, things that are more efficient now and things that can be incorporated, in a growing proportion, to our grid. But starting out with that now.
And looking at this, you just talked about Nigeria's Republic as regards the Trans-Sahara gas pipeline project that's supposed to supply gas all the way to Europe from Africa. What do you make of that? Do you think it's a project that Nigeria should pay attention to? And then how does the tensions in the Niger Republic impact on that project?
I do know that Nigeria is desperately in need of foreign reserves. It's obvious we are in need of foreign reserves. We want to build our foreign income. However, one of the things that we must be very careful of is not locking ourselves into contracts, long-term contracts, that disadvantage us. When it was thought that the Global South or the developing West was hesitant in even releasing the IP, for some of the COVID vaccines that were manufactured. We saw that hesitancy on the part of. We need to be selfish with our resources. Our resources are primarily for us. Nigeria needs to. We say we have no business building a gas pipeline through Niger to Algeria to power the West. We don't have any. I know that people will look at that contrary because we're looking at the revenues and inflow. No, rather than thinking of revenues and inflow, used to power that economy, to drive that growth and development. Let Europe and the West look for other places to generate resources and power the economy. Let's use our resources to power economy. The major focus of the government. The major focus should be long term. We have young people growing. When you have a shift in many of these businesses because of these resources. So for the gas pipeline, it's not a project I do support. And the reason I do not support it is because I find it as a form of new colonialism, where we always have to export those resources.
Want to make to the conversation, feel free to jump in now. Call 090-7353-0044. That is 090-7353-0044 and 090-8766-8888. You can send SMS and WhatsApp messages to 090-9705-4450. That is 090-9705-4450. We're talking about the first half economic outcomes, the report by Oaks Intelligence on the first half of the year in Nigeria. We'll be not just biting on Nigerians, but also Nigerians who live across the border states. With Niger Republic. Join the conversation 0907. Don't forget the president will be swearing in ministers later on. What are those expectations that you have of the ministers? People have said the economy has slowed down because the president didn't have ministers in place, and now he's going to have those ministers in place. What are your expectations? What are the what you call them now, the goals that you set, or or agenda that you would set for these ministers? I'd love to get your inputs as well. Now let's come back to you, Nigeria and Nigerians.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to be very careful of in Nigeria is that, and I think we need to also take cognizance of history. We saw the amount of sanctions that were placed on Russia by the Western countries, and of course we saw the fallout for the West. Russia is on solid footing. Germany is slid into recession. Netherlands, other countries are also going to be joining soon. We are also seeing that the long-term prospects of those countries are also looking very dire. It has still not eliminated the dependence through third-party countries. And so sanctions do not work. And the reason is because we've become it's become a global economy. So our economies are intertwined. And so sanctions cannot work that much. Now for Niger Republic, it's unfortunate because this is a border country with us. And so you just have a line separating both countries. But these are families over the generations that have been built. And so coming up with sanctions is creating conflict. This is more or less the same thing we had during the colonial era. So what's important for the country, for Nigeria, is to understand that what's happening in the Niger Republic is an internal affair. This is internal to Niger, and I think we have enough problems at home to bother ourselves. Young people, there's that excitement. What we can do as how do we resolve the issue? What are the pressing demands? Okay, do we have another referendum? Do we have another election? Do we call the people out to a people's vote to find out if this is what they want? You see, it is not in our position to take decisions, right, for Nigerians. They are the ones to make that decision for themselves. But we can create the environment, right, Nigerians, because you see, when you impose sanctions on Nigerians, the people are passing the sanctions, but the persons who get to suffer become the families between the Nigerians and the border states in Nigeria, families who have to, go across borders, families who have to bear the brunt of no access to electricity. I think Nigeria is not really playing the big brother role she's supposed to be playing. Nigeria needs to ensure that we use our influence rather than creating tension. Let's bring Niger and let's bring this current regime to the negotiating table and agree a way out of the situation. Let's also ensure that the voices of the people are heard. What do they want? So let's find out from the people, what do they want, and then use that,
to have you join us.
Thank you very much. And good morning to your guests this morning. You're speaking nothing but the truth this morning. From your last submission, I want to totally agree with you. There's no point creating more tension between these two countries, knowing their own history with France. And this is what they want. If this is what they want, Nigeria would have just done this like play the real big brother by bringing the two persons on the table. We need to think of better ways to solve this thing. Already, if you listen to the media, the barrier between the North and the South, because the North is beginning to feel that the South is not affected, that's why they want to take this as decision. So it didn't create, I don't know, acrimony between us. So let us not go and pick up foreign fights for our own internal problems. Secondly, I want to say, why can't Nigerians try what China tried? When it was tough for them, they lock up their economy and then develop it very well. Even if we can't lock up, if we want to copy policies, let's look at the security of our own situation here and drain our own. Here.
Okay.
Like what you said, we have a lot of things that we need, and then we want to drain it. Then this lockout that they did with the light, are we still having the light? The one they called in the jar, do we still have the light? A lot of
Paul's comment, Chukwuka.
I didn't get him at all, no.
Okay, Paul is talking about, he agreed creating placing sanctions on Niger Republic, and so he says, look, why don't we look inwards like China did, lock up the economy and ensure that our problems are solved from within. I'm going to bring in another caller and then you can respond to both callers. Hello, good morning.
But I want to ask, why did Russia have to lay pipe from Russia? Look at the desire of Russia to supply other countries in order to get money. That is one. Secondly, on the issue of Niger, I think those of us that we are commenting, the commentator, analysts, I think they have not interrogated ECOWAS to know what ECOWAS is saying that they are not saying. Because if ECOWAS decided that they want to do something, there is something they are saying that we are not saying. And if your neighbor's backyard is on fire, and you say no, there is no problem, it will concern not the economy. Don't forget that President Muhammadu Buhari, he tried to push further that we should get what we want to give ourselves. We say no, don't buy bitterly. The same Niger that we give money and vehicle to the Nigeria cry bitterly that why should they give it to them? The same Niger that during the election we saw they say Niger, what has changed now? What has changed? Nigeria is a political and it's a block power in the entire world. If you don't know, we might be here seeing Nigeria as a nothing, but Nigeria politically, economically, is a power block in Africa.
First of all, he starts with your questioning of the Trans-Sahara pipeline. Russia tries to do. He says, first of all, we were the ones that lamented when President Buhari shut the borders with Niger Republic. And when President Buhari was going to build it, we were saying the current administration should consider Niger as a brother and do some of these things, look within to build the economy. So it leaves him confused. Where do we really want the country to focus?
Trying to fashion out a way is important. We need to first of all diagnose our problem. Too cosmetic. We need an action plan, a real action plan with deliverables, milestones, expectations. We need those plans. What are the resources needed to execute the plans? Do we have hard plans, not cosmetic plans? And of course, we then need to have that implementation. For Olajide's concern, it's a fair question. I mean, why should Russia be having the Nord Stream pipelines 1 and 2 built and all that? You see, the contexts are different. Russia is a world power. Russia is coming from former Soviet, their own economy. Russia has run a surplus economy. Now, many of those things Russia are doing are for geopolitical reasons. And we saw that. We saw the leverage, the gas pipeline of Russia. We saw what that gas pipeline did, with the war with Ukraine. We saw how reluctant Germany was to come on board. We saw the impact, of the decimation of the Nord Stream pipeline, the blowing and all that. We saw how those things have affected the economy overall of Europe. We are seeing the offshoring of businesses, right, from Germany to China. It has a stable economy. They have a very solid economy. So that gives them opportunity to begin to take other strategic investments, for social and security purposes. For Nigeria,
Go ahead.
For Nigeria, we don't even have such. We are still struggling with basic problems. Electricity is still a problem in the country. Poverty is running rife within the country. Opportunities are not available in the country. Healthcare is a problem. Education is a mess. Every sector in the country has problems. But rather than comparing ourselves with countries that are already established and are doing things for strategic purposes, let's look inwards and build solid structures for many of those institutions. How do we build and ensure that electricity supply can become 24 hours regular, cheap, stable? How do we ensure that we can have a very secure supply chain for agriculture, right from the period where they are planted, they are harvested? We have very good supply to ensure that prices are moderated and kept at moderate prices all year round. How can we ensure that? How do we ensure that this issue of insecurity, that's affecting farmers, across the middle belt part of the country or in the other northern states, are solved? How do we ensure that we have that interconnection in terms of the movement of goods and services from one part of the country, making use of our railways and all these things? These are the things we should bother ourselves in the country and not building pipelines or worrying about why Russia built. No, they can do that because they've solved the internal problem. so they can begin to look at other strategic positionings, right, for their country. It's more or less like China investing in Nigeria and all that. They can do that because internally the core problems have been solved. Until we do that, we'll just be putting the cart before the horse.
In 1 minute, let's wrap up this conversation. What would be your thoughts to what priority ministries would you be looking at, and what agenda would you be setting for those ministries?
The key agendas for me for the current administration will be, number one is energy. We need energy. So we want to know where we are going with that, because that drives industrialization, that drives the economy. The second is education. The world is changing. So how is the government going to come up with, a new way of education, vocational skills and everything, some skills to do things, creative thinking is not there. So how do we reinvent our education, and ensure that there's that synergy between education and the industry? That's the second thing that we'll be looking at. And of course, the third thing we'll be looking at in the country is healthcare. Why that's important for me is because